witness accounts have started to emerge from the people who escaped the Algerian hostage crisis at that gas facility in the country's southeast. Now, precise figures are difficult to come by at the moment, and while hundreds have been released, it's thought that at least 30 foreign workers and a number of Algerians remain.
Indeed, since gunmen began their attacks on the gas plant and its workers 2 days ago, the situation has moved quickly and sometimes violently. The Algerian army has retaliated. There's been a predictable loss of life. And what's also notable is how little we know for sure, both about the perpetrators and their intentions, demands, motivations, and indeed who was doing what and when. Nabila Ramdani is with us in the studio, French-Algerian journalist and regular Monocle contributor. We heard some clips in the news, Nabila, of some of the released hostages. Some of them said they didn't know who it was who was holding them. Some of them said we didn't see anybody at all. Are you surprised at how little we know, the gaps in our knowledge in this case?
Actually, I'm not surprised at all. I think it's part and parcel of the strategy of the Algerian authorities to say as little as possible at the moment, because the operation is still ongoing, and certainly the gas facility hasn't been cleared, and the 100% of the security on the site hasn't been restored. So I think until they can guarantee all that, they will not be releasing any details about the way they proceeded in their assault and how they managed to effectively, for the moment, neutralize the terrorists.
Is part of the reason why solid information, both about what happened and indeed how many people are left, is because it's such a large facility spread over a wide area and it's in a very remote part of the country?
Well, absolutely. It's in fact the largest gas facility in the whole country. It's located in the southeast of the country in a pretty deserted location, close to the Libyan border, not too far from the Malian border. And it's precisely one of the reasons why the Algerian government is justifying it such a robust assault on the facility, because it is worth a significant proportion of Algerians' GDP. It is a vital facility as far as the Algerian economy is concerned, and the government is effectively saying there was no possibility that we were going to let Al-Qaeda run the facility effectively, and that's why they justify such a forceful assault.
And presumably why they justify an assault that didn't consult the other people whose citizens were concerned here. And we've heard the British, we've heard William Hague talking about the fact that it was odd that they weren't consulted. They would have preferred to be consulted. How damaging do you think it is for Algeria's international relationships that they went single-handedly here?
Well, I think the view of the Algerian authorities is they saw the matter first and foremost as an internal matter, as a further example of Algeria being the victim of Islamic militancy, an issue that the country has been battling with for decades, especially during the somber 1990s, when the country went through a very savage civil war, which ended up with 250,000 of Algerians being killed, but in fighting between Islamic militant groups and indeed security forces. But it has to be noted that in an astonishing move, President Bouteflika showed openly his support to the French president. Remember, François Hollande visited Algeria last December, offering a qualified apology for France's legacy in its former colony. And high on the agenda were talks about the planned French military intervention in Mali. And François Hollande managed to secure Algeria's cooperation in that, meaning that the Algerian president opened his airspace, making it possible for French planes to use Algerian skies, but also sharing intelligence. And that's precisely what the demands of those terrorists were. They specifically asked for France to withdraw from Mali, and they asked for Algeria to stop its cooperation with the French, and they also asked the Algerian authorities to release 100 Islamists from Algerian jails. So you can see the clear connection there between what's happening in Mali and the fact that Algeria has been the victim of the spillover of this conflict.
OK, there is that connection then. Are you convinced that the motivations of who we believe is the perpetrator, Mokhtar Belmokhtar, is some kind of retaliation or a reaction to what France is doing in Mali?
I think it's abundantly clear that there's definitely a link between the two. And although you have northern rebels in Mali fighting, leading an offensive on effectively the French and the Malian government trying to take over the whole country, well, they are currently experiencing reverses. But in many ways, what they see as most effective is to organize that kind of small-scale operations targeting Western interests and indeed Western lives. They know that for Western leaders, the number one priority is the preservation of Western lives, and that plays into their hands as they can literally hold the whole world to ransom.
And speaking of the preservation of Western lives, one of the sort of eyebrow-raising aspects of this initially was the sheer number of different nationalities working on this site, and it's emerged that that the venture is Norway's involved, Britain's involved, Japan's involved in the engineering side of it. We understand that. Does it mean now that foreign workers across Algeria or workers working for foreign companies should be concerned?
Well, absolutely. And I think, and we've heard also recently that one American national has died as well. And what this incident effectively means is that Western governments who were very much aware of Al-Qaeda inspired, activities in that part of the world, but we're not terribly active in fighting those activities, are now drawn into this issue. Effectively, this incident has opened a new front in the war on terror. And we've already heard the US Foreign Secretary Hillary Clinton saying that once they deal with this ongoing crisis, they will be talking seriously about, how to tackle this issue of Islamic militancy in that part of the world.
Okay, well, we'll talk about some of the demands we think of Belmokhtar in a moment, and the American link there. First of all, do you know how this is being sort of viewed in Algiers, in the north of Algeria? How are people looking at this? How are the press covering it?
Well, I have been speaking myself to Algerians, and I've been reading the coverage in the Algerian press and in the Algerian media in general. And the feeling is that Algerians feel they are very much the victims of the spillover of the conflict in Mali. And they fear that this is bringing back the instability of the 1990s. And it's reopening, a dark chapter in Algeria's history. And in fact, 2 days ago, a bomb was dropped on the northern coast of the country, targeting security forces and injured 4 security officers. So that's very much the view of the Algerians at the moment.
And where do you see it going? As we've said, we have sources. Again, nothing particularly direct. Quoted sources from Belmokhtar's group saying they want to exchange their American hostages for some detainees in American jails. Sheikh Omar Abdelrahman, for example, one of the people arrested over the World Trade Center bombing in New York, and then the Pakistani scientist Aifa Siddiqui as well. But it's difficult, isn't it? You can almost see the response is that we don't negotiate with terrorists, can't you? You can see that coming.
Well, that very much depends on the governments, dare I say. But I think the US and the UK would be pretty firm in not delivering on, terrorist groups' demands. But other governments, European governments, might consider that option to preserve the lives of their citizens. But what is happening is a classic tactic of, and Belmokhtar has form on this. An important point maybe to highlight is the Algerian authorities have also said that negotiations would have been an option had the attack not taken place on such an important facility. Had it been an isolated compound somewhere, then they would have been open to negotiations, as was the case in 2003 when 32 European nationals kidnapped by Belmokhtar's men were freed and released without harm at the time.
One of the really interesting aspects of this, and we're not getting that much information out, but what we have learned is that this division between the foreigners and the Algerians, and then this, I don't think this has necessarily been stood up, but I read in one source that there were Pakistani workers who were arguing that no, we're not foreigners, we're Muslims, therefore we should be put on that side of the room, sort of hypothetically. Does this, is this an interesting sort of arena in which to look at the idea of what is Al Qaeda against, and particularly in a place like this, which has so many different sort of influences coming in?
Well, yes, indeed, because their ideology is pretty simple, and they effectively perpetrate any kind of atrocities that can harm Western interests or that can, they're clearly targeting Western lives, and the West is very much seen as the enemy. Not only because of its values, but because of all it represents. And part and parcel of their ideology is to return to some sort of, very strict conservative interpretation of Islam based on anything that's, the exact opposite of Western values. So, and so they would be sympathetic towards Muslim people in the room, dare I say, and that's why we've seen so many Algerian workers who have been able to escape effectively.
Nabila, we will have to leave it there, but always fascinating to talk to you. I'm sure we will talk to you again as this situation develops.
Yep.
Nabila Ramdani, thank you very much.